She leaned across the courtroom aisle with a smug smile and whispered just loud, enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You came alone, no lawyer? You really think you can beat us by yourself, sweetheart? You're finished." A few people in the gallery glanced my way. Evelyn's lead attorney smirked without looking up from his notes. I said nothing. The bailiff called, "All rise." Judge Harrison entered the courtroom and took 2 steps toward the bench, then stopped. His eyes settled on me. For a moment, he narrowed his eyes as if trying to place an old memory. "Well," he said quietly, "I wasn't expecting to see you here." The courtroom fell completely silent. Evelyn's smile faded. Her attorneys exchanged puzzled looks. Then Judge Harrison gave a respectful nod. "Good morning, Colonel Bennett." A whisper rippled through the gallery. "Did he just say Colonel?" Evelyn stared at me, then back at her lawyers. No one was smiling anymore. She had no idea why the judge recognized me. But before this hearing was over, she was going to wish he hadn't. To understand why Evelyn underestimated me, you have to go back 5 years. My name is Laura Bennett. 20 years prosecuting fraud taught me one lesson. Every forged document hides one mistake. Then I met the one man who changed everything. Mark wasn't just my husband. After 2 decades of military courtrooms, he gave me something I'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. We only had 6 years together. They were the happiest years of my life. Then, without warning, he was gone. I hadn't even finished writing thank you cards from the funeral when Evelyn arrived. She didn't come to comfort me. She came to collect. With a sympathetic smile, she placed a homemade pie on my table and slid a thick envelope beside it. Inside wasn't comfort. It was a lawsuit. According to Evelyn, a newly discovered family trust gave her control of our home, Mark's company, our savings, even the house where we'd planned to grow old together. She had already frozen one of the company's operating accounts. She'd changed the locks on Mark's office. Employees had already started calling her the new owner. I read every page without speaking. The signature looked perfect. The dates matched. Everything appeared legitimate. Until my eyes reached the notary seal. I read it twice, then a third time. My pulse slowed. Panic disappeared. Instinct took over. One tiny detail wasn't just wrong. It was impossible. I closed the file and looked at Evelyn. She smiled, convinced she'd trapped a helpless widow. She never realized she'd just handed me the first piece of evidence that could destroy her case. Because that impossible mistake told me one thing. Evelyn hadn't created this fraud alone. I didn't confront Evelyn. Not yet. If someone with legal experience had helped create those documents, the worst thing I could do was let them know I'd found the mistake. So I smiled, thanked her for stopping by, and closed the door. The moment her car disappeared, I locked myself inside Mark's office. The first county record made no sense. The trust supposedly existed for years, yet there wasn't a single filing before Mark died. I opened the next record. It was worse. The trust had been registered 17 days after the funeral. Then the clerk frowned. "That's strange." "What is?" "There should be another amendment here." She searched again. Nothing. One filing had disappeared from the archive, whether it had been misplaced or deliberately removed. No one could tell me. I left with more questions than answers. The next morning, a courier delivered another envelope. Final settlement offer. If I signed within 48 hours, Evelyn promised to end the lawsuit immediately. Later, I realized why she was rushing. Once the hearing began, every document would face scrutiny. She wasn't offering peace. She was racing against time. That afternoon, I called Mark's former accountant, Susan Keller. She ignored my calls for 2 days. On the 3rd evening, my phone finally rang. "If anyone finds out I met you," she whispered, "I'll never work in accounting again." We met behind a closed public library after sunset. Susan parked 3 spaces away. She checked every mirror twice before stepping out. Without a word, she handed me a flash drive. "I never had time to go through everything," she said nervously. "But whatever you're looking for, it's probably in there." Back home, I opened it. Dozens of folders filled the screen. Payroll, taxes, vendor contracts. Most looked ordinary. Then one folder stopped me. Estate transition. Half the files inside had already been deleted. Someone had tried to erase them. The files that remained included draft trust documents and internal approvals. One approval carried the digital signature of the attorney representing Evelyn. I stared at the name. I recognized it immediately. I forced myself not to react. Maybe the signature was genuine. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, someone wanted me to believe it belonged there. The next morning, I drove to Mark's office. Daniel's desk was empty. He cleared out yesterday, the receptionist told me. No forwarding address. I filed my response prosi that afternoon. Simple. Incomplete. The strongest piece of evidence never appeared in my filing. I wanted to know who would notice it was missing. Then I waited. Because lies have a way of exposing themselves. And guilty people never stay patient for long. The morning of the hearing arrived beneath a gray, rain-filled sky. I parked across from the courthouse and sat quietly behind the wheel. Not because I was nervous, because 20 years in military courtrooms had taught me something most lawyers never learned. Never interrupt your opponent while they're making a mistake. When I entered courtroom 302, Evelyn was already there. She wore a cream-colored designer suit, greeting people as though the case had already been won. Richard Collins, her lead attorney, arranged thick binders across the plaintiff's table with effortless confidence. The moment Evelyn noticed me, she smiled. So, you still couldn't find a lawyer? I didn't look for one. She laughed. This should be over before lunch. Collins walked over, carrying a settlement agreement. My client is making one final offer, he said. Sign today and you'll leave with something. I scanned the first page. It demanded my home, Mark's company, every financial account, even any future claim to his estate. I handed it back. No. Collins smiled politely. I admire confidence, Mrs. Bennett. Then he leaned closer. But military law isn't probate law. I know, I answered. So does the evidence. For the first time, his smile faded, just slightly. Before he could reply, the bailiff called the courtroom to order. Judge Harrison entered, acknowledged both tables with a professional nod, and took his seat. Counsel, you may proceed. For nearly 20 minutes, Collins presented Evelyn's case. He described me as an emotional widow refusing to honor a valid family trust. Several times, Evelyn leaned over and whispered into his ear. Each time, Collins nodded and continued with even greater confidence. Finally, he sat down. Judge Harrison looked toward me. Mrs. Bennett, your response? I stood. Your Honor, before addressing the trust itself, I'd like permission to present one certified registry, record the plaintiff never expected this court to see. Collins was on his feet immediately. We object, Your Honor, and move to exclude any undisclosed evidence. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harrison studied me for several long seconds. Mrs. Bennett, this court will first determine whether the document is admissible. Of course, Your Honor. I placed the sealed certified record on the clerk's desk. Then I spoke. There's one more reason this exhibit wasn't included with my original filing. Collins frowned. It was intentionally withheld. The judge looked up. Explain. 3 days after my filing, someone contacted the county clerk asking why this certified record wasn't attached. The clerk nodded. I documented that inquiry. I continued. Whoever made that call already knew exactly which exhibit was missing. The courtroom became perfectly still. Collins slowly turned toward Evelyn. His face had lost every trace of confidence. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Richard Collins stood and faced the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine the witness. Proceed. Collins approached Susan Keller. Mrs. Keller, were you fired for poor performance? No. Can you prove that? I can. I handed the clerk Susan's certified termination letter. Collins objected, but Judge Harrison reviewed the document himself. After a long silence, he looked up. Objection overruled. The termination letter appeared on the courtroom screen. Reason for termination: failure to comply with revised financial reporting procedures. Collins frowned. Mrs. Keller, who instructed you to alter the financial records? Susan took a steady breath. I received the instructions by email. Do you still have them? Yes. I submitted the printed email chain as Exhibit 12. The messages traced directly back to Evelyn's office. The courtroom fell silent. Evelyn suddenly stood. Daniel told me everything was legal. Judge Harrison struck his gavel. Order. I presented the final exhibits: certified bank records, county filings, and corporate documents. Together, they showed company funds being diverted into shell companies, connected to Daniel Bennett. Judge Harrison spent several minutes reviewing every page. Finally, he looked up. Is Mr. Bennett present today? Collins glanced toward Daniel's empty chair before answering quietly. No. Your Honor, I was informed this morning that he left the state 3 days ago. Collins looked back at the exhibits one last time. Then he slowly closed his binder. Your Honor, my firm respectfully requests permission to withdraw as counsel. The evidence presented today was never disclosed to us. Judge Harrison granted the request. After reviewing the remaining evidence, he delivered his ruling. The plaintiff's petition is dismissed with prejudice. This matter is referred to the district attorney for investigation into possible forgery and financial fraud. Outside the courtroom, state investigators approached Evelyn and requested that she remain available for questioning. I stepped onto the courthouse steps and pulled the small photograph Mark always carried from my wallet. We did it, Mark. The rain had finally stopped. For the first time since he died. So had the fight. 6 months later, Daniel Bennett was indicted on multiple felony fraud charges. Mark's company survived, his employees kept their jobs, and his name was finally cleared. 20 years taught me one lesson. Every forged document hides one mistake. Evelyn's mistake wasn't the signature. It was believing no one would ever look closely enough. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Revenge Diaries for more powerful stories of betrayal, justice, and unforgettable comebacks.